Before we begin, if you value serious, deeply researched discussions about survival history and the overlooked realities of war, subscribe to the Survival Record and share this video with others who care about understanding the past beyond surface-level summaries. There's a persistent belief in modern prepping culture that technological progress has solved the problems of survival. Lightweight water filters, tactical fabrics, GPS navigation, freeze-dried rations, these are often presented as the pinnacle of preparedness. But during the Second World War, millions of soldiers and civilians survived under conditions more extreme than most preppers will ever face, and they did so with tools and improvisations that were, in many cases, more adaptable and more reliable than much of today's consumer gear. The war forced ordinary people to solve problems without supply chains, without replacement parts, and without the option of failure. Some of the solutions they developed have quietly influenced modern doctrine. Others have been forgotten entirely. What's striking is not just that these methods worked, but that they often worked better because they were grounded in simplicity, redundancy, and human judgment. One of the first lessons comes from how soldiers purified water long before commercial filters were common. In the Pacific Theater, American forces, advancing across islands such as Guadalcanal and later through the Philippines, operated in environments where fresh water was scarce and often contaminated. Commercial pump filters did not exist in the modern sense. Instead, soldiers relied on halazone tablets, improvised sand and charcoal filtration layers, and strict discipline about boiling whenever possible. The key was not a single device, but layered redundancy. Chemical purification killed pathogens, improvised filters removed sediment, and boiling served as a final safeguard. The system assumed failure at each stage and compensated for it. Modern preppers often depend on a single high-end filtration device. When it clogs, cracks, or freezes, the plan collapses. WWII practice assumed fragility. It built resilience through overlapping methods. That layered mindset, rather than any specific tablet, was the real survival advantage. Food preservation during prolonged sieges revealed another overlooked strength. Fermentation and controlled spoilage were strategic tools. In occupied Eastern Europe and during the siege of Leningrad, civilians survived in part because of pre-war traditions of fermenting cabbage, beets, and dairy. These were not emergency measures invented during the war. They were cultural habits rooted in centuries of scarcity. Fermentation required no fuel, no refrigeration, and minimal equipment. It preserved micronutrients at a time when vitamin deficiencies could be fatal. Modern preparedness culture emphasizes stockpiled, commercially sealed food with long expiration dates. Yet such systems depend on intact packaging and stable storage conditions. Fermentation, by contrast, is regenerative. It turns surplus into preservation, using bacteria that replicate themselves. In contemporary military survival training, the rediscovery of low-tech food preservation methods reflects a recognition that supply chains fail faster than biology. Cold weather survival on the Eastern Front demonstrated that clothing systems matter more than insulation thickness. German forces invading the Soviet Union in 1941 were equipped for a short campaign. Their winter gear was inadequate, not simply because it was thin, but because it lacked modular layering. Soviet troops, by contrast, often wore multiple simple layers. Undershirts, wool tunics, padded jackets, and greatcoats. None were technologically advanced, but they allowed ventilation during movement and insulation at rest. The lesson is physiological rather than material. Sweat kills in cold weather. Overheating during exertion leads to moisture retention, which later freezes. Modern technical fabrics advertise breathability and moisture-wicking properties, yet the Soviet system achieved similar results through removable layers and strict discipline about managing exertion. It was not about superior fabric. It was about behavioral adaptation to climate. That principle remains foundational in Arctic military doctrine today. Improvised field fortifications in North Africa showed that concealment can matter more than protection. In the desert campaigns between British and German forces, digging deep trenches was often impractical due to rocky ground. Instead, soldiers used shallow scrapes combined with camouflage nets, vehicle parts, and natural terrain folds to break visual detection. Aircraft reconnaissance was a constant threat. Survival depended less on stopping bullets and more on avoiding being seen. Modern survival shelters frequently emphasize rugged materials and structural strength. Yet, the North African experience revealed that invisibility was often the greater asset. A poorly concealed bunker attracts artillery. A shallow, well-camouflaged scrape might never be targeted. Contemporary military doctrine still prioritizes signature reduction, thermal, visual, and electronic, over sheer fortification strength. WWII desert improvisations anticipated this shift decades before electronic warfare made it explicit. Urban survival during the Blitz revealed that decentralized decision-making outperformed centralized control. In London during sustained bombing, official air raid shelters existed, but many civilians quickly learned that smaller, improvised shelters, reinforced basements, backyard Anderson shelters, even reinforced stairwells were often safer because they avoided crowd density. Local knowledge about building structures became critical. People assessed load-bearing walls, window blast risks, and secondary collapse hazards without waiting for centralized instruction. Modern emergency management still struggles with the balance between official guidance and individual adaptation. WWII urban survival demonstrated that empowering civilians with structural knowledge saved lives. Preparedness is not merely equipment stockpiling, it is understanding architecture, materials, and blast behavior. That analytical awareness cannot be purchased. The use of simple signaling methods in resistance movements often proved more secure than advanced equipment. Across occupied France, Norway, and Poland, resistance networks relied on dead drops, chalk marks, laundry signals, and coded phrases in radio broadcasts. These methods required no batteries and left minimal trace. They were resilient precisely because they were mundane. A piece of laundry hanging from a specific window conveyed timing information without arousing suspicion. Modern survival communications often revolve around encrypted digital systems or satellite devices, yet those systems emit signals, depend on power, and can be triangulated. WWII resistance fighters understood that invisibility within normal life was safer than technological sophistication. The lesson is not to abandon technology, but to recognize that, low-tech communication can be harder to disrupt because it blends into background noise. Rationing systems at sea demonstrated the power of strict caloric discipline under uncertainty. Naval convoys crossing the Atlantic faced the constant threat of U-boat attack. When ships were sunk, survivors in lifeboats sometimes drifted for weeks. British naval training emphasized immediate ration control. Water and biscuits were distributed according to projected rescue windows, not hunger levels. The discipline to underconsume early extended survival dramatically. Modern emergency kits often include high-calorie bars and assume short disruption periods. But, WWII lifeboat survival showed that psychological control over consumption is as critical as caloric density. The body can endure more than appetite suggests. Military survival schools still teach ration discipline derived from maritime wartime experience. Perhaps most overlooked is the practice of equipment cannibalization and repair culture. Throughout the war, especially on the Eastern Front and in the Pacific, damaged vehicles and weapons were routinely stripped for parts. Nothing was discarded without inspection. Mechanics developed an instinct for interchangeability, adapting components never designed to fit together. This extended operational capacity despite logistical collapse. Today's consumer survival gear is often sealed, specialized, and difficult to repair. Replacement, not repair, is the norm. WWII necessity created a culture in which mechanical literacy was widespread. The survival advantage lay not in rugged design alone, but in users who understood how things worked internally. Modern military logistics continues to emphasize modularity and field repair capability precisely because wartime experience proved that supply chains cannot be assumed. Even camouflage techniques in the Pacific demonstrated an insight modern outdoor enthusiasts sometimes overlook. U.S. Marines learned quickly that standard-issue uniforms stood out against dense jungle foliage. Soldiers adapted by attaching local vegetation to helmets and gear, but they rotated it frequently because cut plants wilt and change color. Camouflage was treated as a living system requiring maintenance, not a static pattern printed on fabric. Modern camouflage clothing is marketed as universal. WWII jungle warfare revealed that context-specific adaptation, color, texture, even smell, matters more than brand or pattern. Survival depends on observing environmental change and adjusting continuously. Static solutions degrade quickly in dynamic ecosystems. When these overlooked practices are viewed together, a pattern emerges. WWII survival methods often outperformed modern prepping gear, not because they were technologically superior, but because they were grounded in redundancy, adaptability, and human judgment. They assumed uncertainty. They assumed failure. They prioritized behavior over equipment. Many of these lessons quietly shaped post-war military doctrine, layered water purification, modular clothing systems, signature reduction, decentralized resilience, ration discipline, and repair culture. Yet in civilian preparedness culture, the emphasis often drifts toward acquisition rather than capability. Remembering these wartime improvisations matters because they were forged under pressures most modern societies rarely face. They reveal that survival is less about owning the newest tool and more about understanding environment, physiology, logistics, and human psychology. The men and women who endured the Second World War did not have the advantage of choice or convenience. What they developed instead was clarity about what actually works when systems fail. If you found value in this deeper look at forgotten survival strategies from WWII, subscribe to the Survival Record for more in-depth historical analysis, and share this video with others who appreciate careful, serious examinations of the past.